4, 3, 2. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Community Development Block Grant Coronavirus Entitlement Pre-Application webinar. My name is Sharita Jackson, and I am the Community Program Manager for the Small Cities CDBG program. We are so glad you decided to join us today, and we look forward to sharing valuable information regarding the pre-application process for the coronavirus funding. Today, we have an outstanding team of individuals who will join me in the webinar. We have Kate Doyle, who is the Bureau Chief for the Bureau of Small Cities and Rural Communities. We have Ted Court, who is our team leader in the Small Cities CDBG program. We also have Jeff Amison, who is our Environmental Review Manager. And last but certainly not least, we have Kathleen Weisenberger, who is our consultant for the CDBG-CV funding. For informational purposes, we will be recording the webinar presentation, and the presentation will be available at a later date. Finally, if you have any questions during the webinar, we ask that you please enter your questions using the Teams live event Q&A chat, and we will address the questions at the end of the presentation. This afternoon, we will be discussing the CDBG-CV Entitlement Pre-Application Requirements and Process. Our agenda is outlined here. We will be covering overview of the CDBG-CV Entitlement Program, applicant eligibility, program requirements, eligible activities, duplication of benefits, citizen participation requirements, procurement, cross-cutting requirements, how to submit a CDBG-CV pre-application, and after the formal presentation, we will answer questions using the Teams live event Q&A chat. First, we will discuss some basics of the CDBG-CV Entitlement Program. DEO receives an annual allocation of state community development block grant funding from HUD. The CARES Act appropriated additional funding to states and entitlement grantees for specific COVID-related activities. DEO CDBG-CV Entitlement Program is designed to help grantees respond to, prepare for, or prevent the coronavirus. Activities must be critical and primarily benefit low and moderate income residents. HUD allocated CDBG-CV funds in 3 rounds. The state of Florida's total allocation of CDBG-CV funds is just over $285 million. Of the $2 billion HUD allocated in round 1 funding, the state received $16.7 million in the state CDBG program, and Florida entitlements received a total of approximately $75 million. Of the $1 billion in round two funds, the state received $63.1 million to be distributed to both non-entitlement local governments and CDBG entitlement grantees. Of the $2 billion in round three funds, HUD once again funded the state's Small Cities program and the entitlement program separately. The Small Cities program received an additional $20.2 million, and the Florida Entitlements communities received an additional $110.6 million. These funds that are administered under the state CDBG program and allocated to entitlements. As I mentioned in round two, the state received $63.1 million to be distributed to both small cities and entitlements. This chart shows the breakout of funds for the entitlement program, small cities program, and state administration and technical assistance.
What's your chart?
DEO used a national consulting firm, Root Policy Research, to determine the maximum funding available for entitlement jurisdictions individually and for Florida non-entitlement areas collectively. The following factors were used to determine those allocations. The first indicator in the formula is the baseline needs of communities. This number was based on the HUD 2020 allocation formula and was given a 40% weighting. This indicator represents populations that are most vulnerable to housing and economic challenges in general. The second indicator in the formula is the COVID economic impacts using unemployment insurance claims between March 7th and July 31st. This was given a weight of 30%. Reemployment data is only available at the county level. The link to the CDBG-CV entitlement program allocations is available at www.floridajobs.org/CDBG-CV. DEO anticipates accepting pre-applications from entitlements in the late winter of 2021. This pre-application would identify the community need, the activities planned to be undertaken, and the tie to COVID-19. The first of two public hearings must be completed and documented in the pre-application submission. DEO will then conduct a capacity review of the community's pre-application for national objective and eligible activity, as well as the tie to COVID and the applicant's previous experience in CDBG and their capacity to carry out the proposed activity. DEO will provide necessary technical assistance to applicants to ensure projects or programs being proposed are viable. During this period, the entitlement will hold the second of two required public hearings. After any necessary technical assistance, the entitlement will submit a final application, including more detailed information on the activity or activities to be carried out, including final budgets, public hearing documentation, and environmental review documentation as applicable, as well as document the readiness of the project to proceed upon grant award or contract. DEO anticipates they will be accepting final applications in the late spring of 2021. DEO will review and approve applications and execute contracts with local governments in the late summer or early fall of 2021. This is the current anticipated timeline for the CDBG-CV entitlement program. We have our pre-application cycle opening on February 1st, and it will run through March 15th. So the pre-application submission deadline is 5 p.m. on March 15th, 2021. The final application cycle is anticipated for spring summer of 2021. And of course, our contract negotiations are anticipated to occur in fall 2021. Please note that some of the dates may change depending upon the number of applications that we actually receive. So how do you know if your jurisdiction is eligible for funding? A list of eligible entitlement communities is listed on DEO's CDBG Coronavirus Relief webpage under CDBG-CV Entitlement Program Resources. A list of the entitlement allocations can be found on the same page under DEO Method of Distribution. Now let's talk a little bit about CDBG-CV funds and the required relationship to COVID-19. Per the CARES Act and subsequent Federal Register notice, all CDBG-CV funds must be used for activities that respond to, prepare for, or prevent the coronavirus. These can be costs that are directly related to the virus, such as rehabbing for social distancing, vaccine distribution or testing, and etc. This could also be for things that are indirect impacts from COVID. This would be activities like rental assistance to people who have lost income due to the shutdowns, or companies that were impacted financially due to the shutdowns, or social distancing, or even the added expense of cleaning personal protective equipment. DEO will be reviewing all applications to ensure the activities proposal can be tied to the impacts of COVID-19. National objectives. The Housing and Community Development Act requires that all activities funded with CDBG funds must meet a national objective of the CDBG program. The primary national objectives of the CDBG program is to benefit low to moderate income beneficiaries. This can be achieved in 4 ways: through area benefits, through limited clientele, through housing, and through jobs. In addition to meeting a national objective of the CDBG program, CDBG-CV projects and programs must also be designed to prevent, prepare for, or respond to the coronavirus pandemic. Therefore, DEO thinks it is unlikely that a fundable project will be utilizing the national objectives of slum or blight or LMI housing. If you believe you have a project that meets the criteria for CDBG-CV and intend to utilize one of these national objectives, please reach out to DEO immediately to ensure fundability of your project. Now let's talk about what kinds of activities are eligible. All eligible activities of the CDBG program available under Section 105 of the Housing and Community Development Act are available for use in the CDBG-CV program. However, all activities must be able to show how they are designed to prevent, prepare for, or respond to the coronavirus. Basic categories of eligible activities are listed on this slide. We have eligible activities are acquisition, public improvements, public facilities, business assistance, microenterprise assistance, public services, planning, broadband planning, and public infrastructure. Ineligible activities can include general government expenses, buildings for the general conduct of government, political activities, purchase of equipment with exceptions, or equipment for the provision of a public service activity, that's an exception, operating and maintenance expenses with an exception of operating expenses related to a public service activity, new housing. DEO will not be funding the construction of permanent new housing with CDBG-CV funds. Income payments. Emergency payments such as rent or utilities may be paid for up to 6 consecutive months. The payments must go directly to the provider and they must be consecutive. As we mentioned before, DEO will be reviewing all proposed activities to ensure the tie to COVID-19. DEO has not set a threshold for the number of projects or activities that the entitlement may apply for. However, the online pre-application form limits the entitlement to 5 separate activities. As an example, if a community wanted to acquire a building and rehab the facility for use as a vaccination site, DEO would consider this one activity or project. Please contact DEO immediately if this might be an issue. DEO will consider the number of activities along with other criteria during the capacity review prior to awarding funds. We strongly encourage entitlement communities to work with eligible local government communities within your jurisdiction when planning your projects. Additionally, if you decide to work with another entitlement community within your jurisdiction, you may do so and combine the allocations. Over the next slides, we will take a brief look at sample activities that a community may undertake. The first activities we'll look at were buildings and improvements, including public facilities, which would be your acquisition, construction, reconstruction, or installation of public works, facilities, and site or other improvements. So some examples may be rehabbing a facility for testing, diagnosis, and treatment. Another one would be the reconstruction or expansion of sidewalks and roads to allow for social distancing. When we look at rehabilitation of buildings and improvements, we can look at rehabilitating a senior center or homeless shelter by replacing the HVAC system and or installing an air purification system, as well as installation of Wi-Fi routers or extenders in affordable housing buildings for public LMI residents. We also look at assistance to businesses, including specific economic development assistance. So it looks at grants to support new businesses or business expansion to create jobs that manufacture medical supplies to respond to infectious disease, as well as consider possibly technical assistance grants and other financial assistance to establish, stabilize, and expand micro enterprises that may provide things such as medical, food services, food delivery services, cleaning, and other services to support the health and quarantine. Another one is public services, where we look at possibly provide provision of assistance to primary low and moderate income persons. So a couple of examples are providing testing, diagnosis, or other service at a fixed mobile location, or even considering delivering meals on wheels to quarantine individuals or individuals that need to maintain social distancing due to medical vulnerabilities. Our final slide we're going to take a look at regarding sample activities are planning grants, or planning only grants. These are where you can gather data and develop non-project specific emergency infectious diseases response plans or planning activities in conjunction with another eligible activity. And there's some examples listed on this slide. Now we're going to talk a little bit about duplication of benefits. Most of you are already familiar with this from your entitlement CV allocation. The CARES Act requires community planning and development to ensure that adequate procedures are in place to prevent any duplication of benefits as required by the Robert T. Stafford Disaster Relief and Emergency Assistance Act. A duplication of benefits occurs when a person, household, business, government, or other entities receive financial assistance from multiple sources for the same purpose, and the total assistance received for that purpose is more than the total need for assistance. CDBG-CV funds cannot be used to cover costs that have already been paid for or that will be paid for by another federal program, insurance, or other sources. If this occurs, the grantee will have to repay that amount to its CDBG-CV account. Before CDBG-CV assistance is provided, a grantee must verify that subrecipients, assisted individuals or families, businesses, and other entities have not previously received or will not receive duplicative assistance from other sources. For example, two examples are requiring entities or beneficiaries to provide a self certification indicating that they have not received a duplicative benefit, requiring entities or beneficiaries to fill out a questionnaire listing potentially duplicative assistance that they have already received or reasonably anticipate receiving. HUD has provided a list of federal sources that might result in a duplication of benefit. These are not the only possible sources of duplication, so please be sure to fully vet your projects using the Duplication of Benefits worksheet provided by DEO. Applicants must include a copy of their duplication of benefits policies and procedures with the pre-application or final application to DEO. DEO will be recapturing all funds that are determined to be a duplication. To alleviate issues, the applicants must develop and maintain adequate procedures to prevent a duplication of benefits. Procedures must include persons or entities receiving CDBG-CV funds must repay duplicative assistance and a method to assess whether CDBG-CV funds will duplicate financial assistance that is already received or likely to be received by acting reasonably. A copy of the duplication of benefits procedure must accompany the CDBG-CV application. If an entitlement has already developed a duplication of benefits form or checklist for use with CDBG-CV funds, please reach out to DEO for a review and approval to use that form. It is important to note that this is a program of the state CDBG program. All citizens' participation requirements are listed in 24 CFR Part 570, and policies for implementation are set by DEO. Citizen participation will be required in addition to anything the entitlement has done for its own CDBG-CV funds. For the CDBG-CV entitlement program, you will be considered a local unit of government in the state CDBG program, and all applicable citizen participation requirements must be followed. The requirements are to provide for and encourage citizen participation, particularly by low and moderate income persons who reside in slum or blighted areas and areas in which CDBG funds are proposed to be used, to ensure that citizens will be given reasonable and timely access to local meetings, information, and records relating to the units of local government proposed and actual use of CDBG funds, to provide an opportunity to obtain resident views on COVID-related housing and community development needs, to furnish citizens information, including but not limited to the amount of CDBG funds expected to be made available for the CDBG-CV program, the range of activities that may be undertaken with the CDBG-CV funds, the estimated amount of the CDBG-CV funds proposed to be used for activities that will meet the national objective of benefit to low and moderate income persons, and the proposed CDBG activities likely to result in displacement in the unit of general local government anti-displacement and relocation plans required under Section 570.488. Again, it's worth repeating that these funds are subject to the rules for the state CDBG program, and DEO rules and policies must be followed unless the entitlement has stricter standards for their CDBG-CV funds. All public notices must be advertised in a newspaper of general circulation and must be a minimum of 5 days prior to the hearing. It is suggested that other means of communicating with the public are also used, such as Facebook, Twitter, and the applicant's webpage. Please ensure that your notices give enough information about the activities you are proposing to allow citizens the opportunity to understand if they are affected and respond. Let's discuss virtual public hearings. Virtual public hearings are certainly acceptable. However, we recommend considering the following. The meeting must allow all participants to ask questions in real time and allow a period for the questions to be answered. It is best to use virtual platforms that allow the option for conference calls. Some examples are listed on the slide, such as Google Hangout, Zoom, and Facebook Live, or other virtual platforms. Consider call-in options that don't require internet connection. And consult with your attorney prior to implementing virtual public hearings to ensure they meet all local requirements. The first public hearing, which must be completed prior to submission of the pre-application, is to provide the residents information on the available funding, discuss the types of activities that could be implemented, and to get resident input on the community's needs regarding responding to, preparing for, or preventing the coronavirus. The second public hearing is to provide information on application, project, or activities and collect comments on the project. As I mentioned, you must conduct the first public hearing prior to submission of your pre-application, and documentation will be required to be uploaded in the Qualtrics system. CDBG-CV funds are subject to procurement requirements as outlined under 2 CFR 200 as well. All normal CDBG procurement regulations are in place for CDBG-CV funding. You will find additional information regarding procurement regulations using the following points of reference. 2 CFR 200.318 through 326 details the various methods of procurement. 24 CFR Part 75, Section 3 will share information there as well. Florida Statute 287 0.055 for architects and engineers, and the entitlement procurement policies if they are stricter than the federal requirements. The key takeaway from Florida Statute 287.055 is that you may not obtain a price prior to negotiations. All procurements in excess of the federal simplified acquisition threshold, which is currently $250,000, must have an independent cost estimate prior to receiving bids or proposals. This slide gives examples for each procurement method and the price or cost analysis, contract type, solicitation method, and examples of goods or services being procured. An independent cost estimate serves as a yardstick for evaluating the reasonableness of the contractor's proposed costs or prices. An independent cost analysis consists of evaluating the separate elements, for example, labor or materials, that make up a contractor's total cost proposal to determine whether they are allowable, directly related to the requirement, and reasonable. Price analysis. Price analysis is essentially price comparison. It is the evaluation of a proposed price, total or sum, without analyzing any of the separate cost elements. And cost analysis is the evaluation of the separate elements, labor, materials, profit, etc., that make up a contractor's total cost, proposal, or price to determine if they are allowable, directly related to the requirements, and ultimately reasonable. Cost analysis should apply to both new contracts and contract modifications or change orders. Now we're going to talk a little bit about environmental review. This is a very important topic because the required process for environmental reviews under this program will be different than what you normally do. The CARES Act does not waive CDBG requirements for an environmental review per FR 6218-N-01. All CDBG-CV projects or programs must still meet the requirements for environmental review that are outlined in 24 CFR Part 51, 24 CFR Part 58, and state CDBG regulations at 24 CFR 570.604. It is important to note that as these funds are distributed under the state CDBG program, all applicants or grantees must follow DEO processes for these cross-cutting requirements. It is a particular note that in the state CDBG program, our requests for release of funds are submitted to DEO, and DEO issues the authority to use grant funds. For projects that include only exempt and categorically excluded, not subject to activities, applicants should submit the appropriate forms along with supporting documentation to DEO with the pre-application. If a grantee anticipates using CDBG-CV for administration, environmental review record, or etc., a certificate of exemption must be included in the pre-application for those activities, regardless of the project level of review. For categorically excluded, subject to, and environmental assessment projects, the grantee is encouraged to submit the environmental review record to DEO before final application, but it must be included with the final application at the latest. The first requirement to understand regarding the environmental review process is the importance of avoiding choice limiting actions. The local government grantee and all other participants in a CDBG project, including other public entities, nonprofit agencies, or for-profit developers, or any of their consultants, cannot commit HUD or non-HUD funds if an activity would have an adverse environmental impact or limit the choice of reasonable alternatives. If the reviewer is aware that a subrecipient, developer, or beneficiary is about to take action that would limit alternatives or choice limiting action, the reviewer must take appropriate action to defer those actions to ensure that NEPA and related laws are reviewed and followed before choice limiting decisions are made. Examples of choice limiting actions are acquisition, leasing, rehabilitation or construction, and site improvements to include demolition and site clearance. Here are some additional examples of choice limiting actions. So we discussed acquisition of land and structures, demolition, construction bidding, new construction, rehabilitation, leasing, and site improvements. Not everyone on the webinar is familiar with environmental reviews. We will be going over the basics today. There are 4 levels of environmental review: exempt, categorically excluded, environmental assessment, and environmental impact statement. Categorically excluded has 2 subgroups: subject to and not subject to. Now, let's go into what each of those are. Starting now with the lowest level of review, exempt activities. Typically, exempt activities include administration of CDBG projects, environmental assessment or studies, planning or management, engineering or architectural design and inspection. Exempt activities are defined in Section 58.34 of the HUD regulations. Even exempt activities require environmental review and documentation before proceeding. We will cover the review process after discussing all of the categories of review. Some examples of exempt activities are general CDB administration, planning only activities, design costs, and public service activities. Under categorically excluded, there are 2 classes of activities. These are named excluded because they are excluded from certain NEPA requirements, but not all federal laws and environmental requirements. These 2 categories are often shortened to excluded not subject to, or excluded subject to, or just subject to and not subject to, or even just their acronyms, CENST and CEST. Some examples of CENST activities are tenant-based rental assistance, supportive services to include healthcare, housing, and placement, operating cost, economic development cost, some forms of home buyer assistance, affordable housing, pre-development costs, and maintenance. Keep in mind that not all activities listed in 24 CFR Part 58 are eligible for CDBG, and particularly CDBG-CV. Activities must still be eligible in the CDBG program and be related to COVID for CDBG-CV funds. Examples of activities in this category are acquisition, when there is no change in land use, removal of architectural barriers, and rehabilitation of buildings. If an activity is not listed in Part 58 under one of the other categories of review, the level of review required for your project would be environmental assessment. Finally, environmental impact statements. This is it's the highest level of review and are required when a project is determined to have a potentially significant impact on the environment. It is important to note that the size of the project alone does not determine significance. The nature of the impact does. The environmental impact analysis is not limited to the potential impact of the HUD assisted activity. It examines the site and the surrounding area and must consider the potential impact from the entire scope of the area potentially affected by the project's activity. You very rarely see environmental impact statements for CDBG projects. Environmental impact statements are required for projects like a new airport, dams, or train station. These projects are seldom funded with the state's CDBG-CV funds. Again, it is important to note that the CDBG-CV entitlement program is funded with state and small city CDBG funds. All rules and requirements are determined by federal statute, regulations, and DEO policy. More information on DEO's procurement and financial management policies, procedures, and forms can be found on the DEO CDBG Downloads for Recipients webpage. All normal CDBG procurement and labor standards and regulations are required and is noted in 24 CFR 570.603. Additionally, all normal CDBG civil rights and EEO requirements are listed in 24 CFR 570.487. CDBG-CV is subject to all requirements of the Uniform Relocation and Real Property Acquisitions Act, as well as Section 104D of the Housing and Community Development Act. More information on DEO's URA policies, procedures, and forms can be found on the DEO Downloads for Recipients webpage. So now that we've gone over all the basic rules and requirements, let's talk about submitting the pre-application. The first step in preparing your pre-application will be to identify the community's needs. This will be done by conducting research, evaluating current programs, and particularly by conducting the first required public hearing. The public hearing must be conducted prior to submission of the pre-application. Be properly noticed and included the grantee's four-factor analysis and the language access plan, if applicable. More information on this requirement can be found in the program guidelines on the CDBG-CV webpage. The next step will be to identify any subrecipients. If subrecipients will be used in the CDBG-CV entitlement program, documentation of the relationship and commitment should be obtained for submission with the pre-application. These partnerships may or may not be identified at this stage. Please include as much information about partnerships as possible in the pre-application to expedite the DEO capacity review. You will also need to identify the key personnel for the project and grant administration. Will you use staff or will you need to procure services? Documentation of prior experience will be uploaded with the pre-application. Based on the national objective for your project, you may be required to determine if census data supports your service area or if an income survey will be required. You will need to determine if your beneficiaries are a presumed group or already have documentation of 51% LMI based on other programs, or if there will intake documents be necessary. You will also need to develop your project budget. Final detailed project budgets do not have to be finalized by the pre-application, but should be as detailed as possible and include all funds that will be requested. All applicants must submit a pre-application for DEO review prior to submitting the final application. Pre-applications will be reviewed, for national objective, eligible activities, citizen participation, capacity of jurisdiction. The entitlement may submit one application that includes up to 5 activities. As we mentioned before, an activity for this purpose is considered a single program or project and not an IDIS activity. General administration, design fees, acquisition, and rehab of a facility for a vaccination site would be considered one activity. Pre-applications will be submitted online via the Qualtrics system. A link to the pre-application registration is available on the CDBG-CV webpage. Once you have registered, a personal one-time link will be sent within 2 business days. Okay, so let's go through a few steps on how to submit the pre-application. First, you will be required to register to get the pre-application link. And here is some of the information that we'll kind of go through: the applicant name, the application preparer, email address, phone numbers, contact information for the local, and email for the local government. Once you receive the single-use pre-application link, you can log into the Qualtrics system and enter your application. Throughout the pre-application, tips are provided below. And here's the welcome screen for the pre-application. Okay. The online application will automatically save as you go. Until you submit the application, you can return using the same link. However, pages that have been completed cannot be returned to. DEO recommends completing your application in a Word document and preparing all uploads before you begin entering in the system. Once you have submitted your application, you cannot return to the application. If you have any questions or issues, you can contact DEO at 850-717-8405 or by email at cdbg-cv@deo.myflorida.com. Applicants will need to choose a type or category of funding. If you are unsure what category your project falls into, please contact DEO. The following documents will be required as part of the pre-application submission. So here we have listed the federal identification number, sam.gov with expiration date, the CAGE code, which is at sam.gov, your DUNS number, with public hearing documentation regarding four-factor analysis, language access plan if it is applicable, hearing notice with print large enough to review, the publisher's affidavit, the meeting minutes that are certified, sign-in attendance sheet. We would also need letters of commitment, application documentation, federal ID number and DUNS number, which you mentioned previously, your proposed budget template, key personnels with job descriptions and resumes, as well as HUD audit or monitoring findings if applicable. Additionally, we will request CDBG policies and procedures, financial management, procurement, Section 3 compliance, labor standards, URA information, record keeping, and last but not least, subrecipient monitoring. At this time, we will answer any questions that you may have. Please enter any questions you have in the chat. Some of you may have already entered a few questions as the presentation was going along, and we will answer all those questions at this time. Kate, do you have any questions that are already ready to be answered?
Yes, we do. Thank you, Sharita, for that presentation. We just published one of the questions. It says, do I understand correctly that if every entitlement jurisdiction applies for the maximum allocation, the total request for funds will be $58,748,222 for a total of $51,050,911 in available funds? On this, our answer for that is I'm going to post this reply for everyone to see. The CARES Act CDBG-CV Round 2 allocation methodology for Florida communities can be found on the DEO webpage. This formula considers the amount awarded to the state, the amount retained by the state for general administration and technical assistance, and funds that will be awarded to non-entitlement communities from the Round 2 allocation. And it appears that the link did not copy over, so I am going to put that link in to the chat now. The second question I'm publishing for everyone to review is, can you apply for this grant if you are currently using CDBG housing funds? And then the second part of that question is, if the county applies, could you also assist city clients? So the first answer to the first part of the question is, all eligible entitlement communities listed on the CDBG-CV Entitlement Program eligible communities list are eligible to apply. Current allocations of CDBG, CDBG-CV, or other HUD funds don't affect this eligibility. So basically, non-entitlements who are eligible in the regular Small Cities program are not eligible for this program. Also, for that second part of the question, we would need for you to contact us at DEO to further discuss this, because there's different nuances to that. But generally, if you're a local government jurisdiction that participates in an eligible entitlement community program, then you may be assisted with this county, with this grant or allocation. But if the city itself is also an eligible entitlement under the program, you would need to make sure that you have coordination between the entities to ensure there's no duplication of benefit. Also, we are encouraging you that if you are an entitlement community and you have another entitlement community, that you all can work together, and if you want to combine your allocations if need be. So that's the answer to that question, and I will provide you all with that answer in writing as well. The next question is, are the creation of jobs limited to jobs created to respond to COVID, or can jobs be created in any field? And for that, we have that HUD does recognize that there's a clear benefit that's derived from addressing economic disruptions due to coronavirus. The jobs themselves are not restricted to direct pandemic response. So you do have some flexibility there related to the jobs. The next question is, it says, it seems that rental assistance to low to moderate income households would be an eligible activity under HUD guidelines, but that DEO is discouraging not funding this activity. Is that correct? Rental assistance is an eligible direct benefit activity and would be eligible under the LMC national objective. Okay, so I'm also scrolling through to see if we have any additional questions. Okay. There's a question that asks, it says, there appears to be a published entitlement allocation. Is this the maximum the city can apply for? And for that, yes, what you need to do is go to that list that we have provided the link for above in the Q&A chat. And that will tell you the amount of your entitlement allocation, and that would be the maximum that you could apply for. However, if it's after the application period, if not enough communities apply for their allocations and we have additional funds, then you could request for those funds. We'll be redistributing those throughout the program if another entitlement community does not use their full allocation. Okay, there's a question. The city is an entitlement and recently received 2 rounds of CDBG-CV funds. Would we need to apply for these funds? So if I'm understanding this correctly, as far as the 2 rounds of CDBG-CV funds that you received directly from HUD, that you would go through and do your action plan and get those funds directly from HUD. Whatever process you use with HUD, that's how you would get those 2 rounds of CDBG-CV funds. But for the funds that are going to be distributed through the state program, where we listed out the allocations for each entitlement community, in that, yes, you would need to go through the pre-application and the application process. And let me see if we have some more questions here. Okay, so it says, to be clear, these aren't competitive dollars. These are funds the city can access if the application is approved. Yes, after we go through the pre-application process, we will be determining your capacity to administer the funds, as well as evaluating the activities for meeting national objectives, the tie to COVID, making sure that you have the proper procedures in place. Once we've approved all of that, then yes, you would be able to then submit an application up to the amount that you have been allocated based on those activities that we have approved for you to conduct. So let me see, Pam or anyone else, it looks like I've answered all of the questions. Have I missed any of the questions in the Q&A?
We did have a couple of questions that I answered, so I can just go ahead and publish because it's good information for all of our participants. So I'll do that. Let's make sure if it's publishing my reply along with it.
That's correct. I don't think it does do that. So if you could repaste those in there. So we had some questions about, did you say that the link to request pre-application is available right now on the CDBG-CV site, or will it be available on February 1? No, it is not yet on the CDBG-CV site. It will be available on February 1 when the pre-application cycle opens, and that will be at www.floridajobs.org/CDBG-CV. And when you go to that page, there will be a link for the registration for the pre-application. And Pam has placed the link within the Q&A chat. Another question that came up is, we are a Florida municipality interested in creating a CDBG-CV small business grant program. Is there a contact at DEO who we may work with directly to ensure that our program plan is in accordance with the requirements and regulations of CDBG-CV funding? Yes, we do have program staff that are available to provide you with technical assistance, and we can assist you in that. So please just reach out to us, and Pam has put in our live event Q&A the email address inbox that you can send your request, and we will set up an appointment for you to have a call with one of our program staff. That is cdbg-cv@deo.myflorida.com, or you can call us at area code 850-717-8405 with any questions. And we are going to be popping that up in our next slide as well. So wait, it looks like we had a new question that came in. What is the pre-application deadline? That is a good question. The pre-application deadline right now, we do not have one. It's going to be a rolling pre-application. You can submit those as soon as you have completed it. However, once we start opening up the final application, then we will probably have an end date where we will end the application. So you'll have to go through both the pre-application and the application process, but we don't have a specific deadline on the pre-application. Once we open the final application, we'll have a closing deadline for the pre-application. Okay, it looks like we have some new questions coming on online. Can we get a copy of the slides? Yes, we are going to be emailing those slides to everyone who has participated on this webinar today, and we will also be posting them, but it may be next week by the time we send you the slides. We've also recorded the presentation, and once we're able to transcribe the presentation, we will get that loaded up online. Another question, are we able to submit for public service funds in the pre-app, then do an application to do subrecipients to extend those funds and use those in the final application? Not sure exactly. Happy to have Ted or Kathleen weigh in on this. I'm not sure exactly about the question here. I think it's asking if public service funds are an eligible activity. Yes, they are. We would want to make sure that you have a subrecipient in place for that. And so we would be evaluating your subrecipient in the pre-application phase. Ted, are you weighing in?
Yeah, we're talking about a specific project, and I think when we were looking at the pre-application, they do ask the local government to identify, subrecipients. It was our assumption that entitlements, they're an ongoing operation on a year-to-year basis, and they are well aware or very familiar with preferred service providers within the community that they would rely upon to help them implement their project. So I think the only thing they're asking for in the application, the pre-application, is to identify those parties and a letter of support so we can determine that you have these potential subrecipients in place. Now, you may have something in your pre-application and there may be minor changes, in who a subrecipient might be when you submit your final application, but generally, I think they are requiring that you identify them.
Okay. And then we got another question. I think it's maybe a follow-up to it, or it's the same. Okay, I apologize. It looks like I've published it twice, or maybe it's the same question. If you could just follow up, if we have not answered your question here, please type in a follow-up response or question. And we'll hold for just another minute or so to see if we get any other questions in the live event Q&A. And then if we don't, we will pass it back over in just a moment to Sharita to wrap up our presentation. Okay, we got a new question in. Is this webinar being recorded and how can we access the recording? What we're going to do is after the presentation, yes, we are recording it. However, to be ADA compliant with posting it on our website, we need to transcribe the presentation. So we will be doing that. And then probably sometime next week, we will be posting a link on our website. Again, we'll put it on that floridajobs.org/CDBG-CV. It looks like we got a new question. Okay, we are a small town with 3 employees in City Hall, including the town manager. Do you know or can you make any recommendations on agencies that can assist with grant writing? I'm not sure that we can specifically make any recommendations, but there are consultants that are available and administrative costs are reimbursable if you procure a consulting service to assist you in your grant administration. Ted, did you want to add to that?
I was going to say that local governments are allowed to contract with the local regional planning council also. They don't actually have to go through a procurement. So if you're looking for an entity, a consultant firm or something like that, Kate was right. We can't recommend a consultant directly, but you can do like a solicitation or an advertisement in a local newspaper, like a request for proposals for a experienced consultant to help you develop an application, and that's what I would recommend, just a public solicitation.
Mm-hmm.
You can even go, I think, if it's an RFP, you'd want to advertise in a local newspaper in accordance with our program requirements. It's advertising an MSA, and if you only get one responsible proposer, you can request DO's approval of the procurement. We'd have to check to confirm compliance with, program requirements. If you got 2 or more, then and you complied with program requirements, you could select one of the 2. But I'd recommend public advertisement.
Correct. just make sure that you go back to what Sharita went over in the slides related to our procurements. Just want to remind everybody to make sure you're following those procurement policies unless you're working with a regional planning council. And to review those. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us at the email address and the phone number that we listed above and that we will be showing in our next slide. We're happy to provide you with technical assistance. So if you have any questions about that procurement process or what needs to be done, we will let you know about that. And like we mentioned, those would be reimbursable cost if you were awarded a grant.
Can I just add one more thing?
Yes, please do.
You know, it's a small town with like 3 employees. That sounds like a small cities, or it sounds like a community that is participating in an entitlement program. If you participate in the entitlement program, you might want to contact the entitlement entity and request assistance from them, because they're the ones that are actually going to be making the determination as to how those funds are used.
Correct. Yes, I think that's a good point that Ted just pointed out. Right now, we're on the CDBG-CV Entitlement Program webinar, but we did hold a Small Cities webinar yesterday, which we will also be posting on our website if you missed it, so that you can go back and listen to it. That is a competitive application cycle. So basically, if you look at the eligible communities, look through those lists, and if you see that you're an eligible small cities community, then you need to make sure that you're applying through your pre-application process through our small cities program. If you're a small community and you're reviewing the entitlement communities and you do not see your community listed, then either look on the small cities list to see if you're eligible. If not, then what you need to do is contact the entitlement community that your jurisdiction is located within. So for example, the county that you're located in may be an entitlement community. And if they are the entitlement program, then you need to participate. They will be the eligible applicant. You would not be an eligible applicant. That would be an entitlement community. Okay, well, we still have our live event Q&A open, but I do not see any other questions coming in. We will just another moment or two. If you have an opportunity, we're still available. We have the webinar until a little bit later. So if you have any other questions, feel free to pop those into the live event Q&A. Okay, I do not see any additional questions coming in to the live event Q&A. And so at this time, I'm going to pass it back over to Sharita Jackson to finalize our webinar.
Thank you for participating in our webinar today. As we mentioned, the webinar slide will be provided on the CDBG-CV website. We also have updated the FAQ and other CDBG source materials as they become available. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to the CDBG program staff at the number and email listed on the slide. Thank you again and enjoy the rest of your day.